All right, so welcome. We're going to be diving into a case from Bermuda using excerpts from the actual court judgment. So this has been the deep dive.
It has.
Thanks for listening.
And thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time.
In this podcast, there could be mistakes, so please check the source material. Enjoy exploring and have a great day.
The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended as legal advice and should not be relied upon as such. While efforts are made to ensure accuracy, the information discussed may not reflect the most current legal developments and is subject to change. For advice on specific legal issues, consult a qualified attorney licensed in your jurisdiction. The opinions expressed are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of any organizations they are affiliated with. By watching this video, you acknowledge and agree to this disclaimer.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. You wanted to know more about data privacy in Bermuda, and we're going to get into all the nitty-gritty details. But before we do, gotta give a shout out to you all for sending us these excerpts from the Personal Information Protection Act of 2016.
Yeah, the PIPA.
It's great to have the actual source material. Right?
Absolutely. It's the foundation.
But sometimes legalese can be,
Little dense.
little dense.
It can be.
Exactly.
That's where I come in. To help break it down, make it understandable, and see how it actually impacts you.
Perfect. So one of the things that really jumped out at me when I was going through this act was this whole idea of compensation for distress.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
It's not just about...
It's not what people usually think about.
Right.
When they hear data breach.
It's not just like, oh, somebody stole my credit card number.
Right. It's not just about the financial impact.
It specifically says you can seek compensation for emotional distress. If an organization doesn't comply with the act, like imagine a company leaks your data and now you're having panic attacks, you can't sleep at night, all this anxiety, you could actually have legal recourse for that emotional toll.
Yeah, it really acknowledges that broader impact that data breaches can have on people.
It's not just your wallet. It's your well-being, your mental health.
It's about the whole person.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, is this the future of data privacy laws?
I was thinking the same thing. Are we going to see this emphasis on emotional well-being become more common?
Could be. As our lives get even more digital, the stakes just get higher.
Absolutely. Now, of course, it's not like this act is a free pass for everyone.
Oh, no, definitely not.
There are some pretty significant exemptions in there.
There are.
Particularly when it comes to national security.
As you'd expect.
Right, you'd expect that. But also, and this is the one that surprised me, communication providers. So, like, my internet company.
Basically, yeah. It's tricky.
What does that mean for things like my browsing history?
Well, let's say you're using some online platform here in Bermuda, something, sensitive, like getting financial advice.
Oh, okay.
You're trusting them with a lot of personal information.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, imagine there's a data breach.
Oh.
But it's not just a random hack. This is due to, and I'm quoting the act here, professional incompetence, malpractice, or seriously improper conduct.
Whoa. Okay.
Like the financial advisor makes a mistake, leaks your data, maybe even give you bad advice based on what they saw.
Oh, now a double whammy.
Yeah, exactly.
But wait, they're exempt, right?
True, it's a communication provider.
Yeah.
But in this specific situation, where there's financial loss due to that conduct, the act still applies.
So there is some accountability.
There is.
Even with those exemptions.
You get to read the fine print.
It's all about those nuances.
It really is.
Now, speaking of nuances, there's this other part that I found fascinating.
Like, tell me.
These minimum requirements that still apply even when exemptions are invoked.
Even in cases of national security.
Right.
There are certain things Bermuda just won't budge on.
Like, they still prioritize protecting charities from financial mismanagement.
Huh. So even if it's like a matter of national security.
It makes you wonder, what kind of scenario are they envisioning?
It's very specific.
It is.
It's almost like they're saying,
I know.
Okay, national security is important, but we also have to protect our charities.
It's fascinating.
It really is. And I think it speaks to their values as a society.
Right. Like, even in extraordinary situations, these core principles, they still hold true.
Exactly.
It's not just about protecting individuals. It's about protecting the whole fabric of Bermudian society.
I like that. fabric of society.
Yeah, that sense of stability, of trust.
Especially in a place like Bermuda.
Right.
A global financial hub.
Where reputation is everything.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody has to be responsible for making sure all this actually happens.
Right.
And that's where we get to the privacy commissioner.
Oh, yeah.
This person sounds like a real data superhero.
They do have quite a bit of power.
Appointed by the governor, holding everyone accountable.
You know, before we jump into the commissioner, we should probably clarify something for our listeners.
Oh, good point.
Not everyone might be familiar with how things work in Bermuda.
Right, right.
Politically speaking.
So for those who don't know, Bermuda is a British overseas territory, which basically means they have their own government. But the King of England is the head of state. And they have a governor.
Appointed by the British government.
Right, who represents the monarch.
Right.
And it's the governor who appoints the privacy commissioner.
Exactly. And that detail matters. Because it speaks to the idea of independent oversight.
Ah, I see.
The commissioner isn't beholden to any political party or interest group. They're there to enforce the act impartially.
Okay, that makes sense. And they have some serious power, too.
They do. The act gives them the authority to investigate complaints, issue orders, even go to court if necessary.
Wow.
They're not just a figurehead.
They're kidding. But it makes you wonder
What's that?
if the commissioner's appointed by the governor, is appointed by the UK government, could there ever be a conflict of interest there?
That's a great question. And it gets right to why the act is so insistent on the commissioner's independence.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got potential compensation for emotional distress.
Right.
We've got exemptions, minimum requirements that highlight some pretty interesting priorities. And we've got a privacy commissioner with some real teeth.
It's a lot to unpack.
This act is packed.
It is.
But before we dive deeper into how all of this works in practice, we need to talk about the elephant in the room.
Oh, I know where this is going.
Those exemptions, especially for communication providers.
They're broad, potentially problematic,
Yeah.
and they raise a ton of questions.
About how balanced this act really is. I mean, those exemptions for communication providers.
Yeah.
On the one hand, I get it. You don't want to over-regulate companies providing essential services.
Right. You need the internet to run smoothly.
But on the other hand, it feels like this huge loophole.
It's a tough balance.
It really is.
It's a global challenge figuring out
Right.
how to regulate these powerful companies
Right.
while also respecting, national security concerns.
It's a tricky situation.
It is.
We all want privacy, but we also don't want the government reading all our emails.
Absolutely.
So where's the line?
Right. Where's the line?
And even if we accept that some exemptions are necessary, how do we make sure they're not being abused?
That's the key question.
How do we know
Yeah.
these companies are actually being responsible with our data?
Well, one way to look at it
Yeah.
is through the lens of those minimum requirements.
Ah, right, those core principles.
Exactly.
Even when the exemptions kick in. Like, if it's a matter of national security, a worker who reports unsafe conditions on a construction site, they're still protected.
That's a good example.
That's pretty powerful, actually.
It shows what Bermuda considers absolutely essential.
No matter what.
No matter what. Preventing serious financial loss.
Right.
Protecting charities' health and safety.
It's like they're saying, look, we might have to compromise on some things, but these fundamental rights are non-negotiable.
Yeah, it's like a line in the sand.
And that focus on financial stability, it really makes sense when you think about Bermuda's history.
Their whole reputation is built on being this reliable financial hub.
Right, they've got to protect that.
Absolutely.
But even with those minimum requirements, I still feel like a lot depends on the privacy commissioner.
Oh, for sure.
How they interpret and enforce the act.
They have a huge role.
We've talked about their powers. But what about limitations?
What do you mean?
Are there checks and balances?
Well, the Act specifically states
Right.
that the commissioner can't hold any other job.
Oh, interesting.
While in office, that is.
So they're fully dedicated to this role.
They are. It's a big commitment.
And it emphasizes their independence, right?
It does. They're not supposed to be swayed by outside interests.
And they're not just waiting for complaints, right?
No, they're proactive, too.
They have a role in promoting awareness and education.
Absolutely.
So they're not just a watchdog. They're also a resource.
More like a guide.
For businesses, individuals.
Yeah.
Trying to navigate this whole data privacy landscape.
Exactly.
Okay, that's good to know. But how do we know that they're actually using their powers effectively.
The million-dollar question.
Are companies actually being held accountable when they mess up?
Well, that's where it gets a little tricky. Bermuda's government, they're pretty tight-lipped.
About specific enforcement actions.
Especially privacy cases. They cite the need to protect the individuals involved.
Okay, I get that, but it's a bit of a black box, isn't it?
It can feel that way.
We know the rules, we know the commissioner has power, but we don't actually see how it's all playing out.
That lack of transparency can be frustrating.
It is.
But there are other ways to gauge the impact.
Like what?
Well, one thing to look at is the number of complaints
Oh, okay.
filed with the commissioner.
So, if there's a steady increase
It could suggest that people are more aware
of their rights,
of their rights and more willing to exercise them.
it shows people are paying attention,
Exactly.
not just letting things slide. Another thing to consider is how businesses are responding.
Are they implementing stronger data protection measures?
Right.
Being more transparent about how they use data?
Those are all good signs, right?
They are,
It shows the act is having an impact.
even if we don't see a ton of public enforcement.
Right. Even the threat of enforcement,
Could be a powerful motivator,
especially in a place like Bermuda.
where reputation is everything.
Exactly. So it's a bit of a trust but verify situation.
Yeah, I like.
We trust the commissioners doing their job, but we're also looking for those signs that the act is actually changing behavior.
Subtle signs, maybe?
Subtle.
But sometimes the most effective enforcement happens quietly, behind closed doors.
True. Maybe a strongly worded letter is enough to get a company to shape up.
Sometimes a nudge is all it takes.
But speaking of nudges, those fines for non-compliance,
Oh, yeah.
they're not messing around.
They can be pretty hefty.
And even criminal penalties in some cases.
For serious breaches, yeah.
That's a serious deterrent.
It is.
But again, how often are those penalties actually imposed?
That's where the transparency issue comes back.
Right. It's hard to say for sure.
Want more information?
It's like a missing piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
We see the framework, the tools, but not the full picture of how it's working.
And that's important because the power of these laws, these protections, it relies so much on how they're actually implemented.
Right. It's not just about words on paper.
It's about action.
It's great to have these strong privacy protections in law, but if they're not enforced consistently, transparently, then what's the point?
It raises the question of how do we ensure that laws actually serve the people they're designed to protect?
It's a big question.
It is.
And it makes me wonder if there are other ways to hold these companies accountable.
Beyond the legal system.
Yeah, like what about public opinion?
Interesting.
Consumer activism. Do those things have any weight in Bermuda?
That's a great question. And it deserves its own deep dive.
Right. We've talked about the law.
The commissioner, transparency.
But ultimately, real change often comes from a shift in cultural norms.
A shift in expectations.
And who drives that? The people.
Exactly.
It's about being informed, being vocal, demanding better.
From the companies we interact with every day.
Yeah, so we might not have all the answers about enforcement in Bermuda right now.
But we can empower ourselves.
With knowledge.
With knowledge.
And use our voices.
To push for greater transparency.
And accountability.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm feeling a little less helpless now.
Good, good.
Knowledge is power, right?
It is.
And this whole discussion about Bermuda, it's actually a microcosm of a much bigger conversation.
Oh, absolutely.
Happening all over the world.
Yeah.
About data privacy, about technology.
About how we balance these things.
We're seeing these same tensions everywhere.
The balance between security and privacy.
Right.
The power of these tech companies.
A need for transparency, accountability.
It's all connected.
It's like Bermuda is this case study.
It's a laboratory.
For exploring these big, complex questions
that we're all facing.
In the digital age.
That's a great way to put it.
And maybe, just maybe, Bermuda has some insights that can help the rest of us.
With its unique history and position.
Right. As we try to figure out how to navigate this new world.
It's certainly possible.
So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
Exemptions, minimum requirements, the privacy commissioner, enforcement, public opinion.
It's been a whirlwind.
A whirlwind. I'm kind of amazed by how much we've gotten into.
I know, right?
Starting with that one question about data privacy in Bermuda. And now, wow, we've talked about...
In different aspects.
It's not just about the law itself.
It's bigger than that.
It's about values.
Yeah, what a society prioritizes,
What they're willing to protect.
even when things get complicated.
And for Bermuda, it seems like financial stability, transparency.
Accountability, big time.
Those are the core values.
That shape how they approach data protection.
Even in sensitive areas
It's like national security.
where other countries might be more flexible. Makes you think about those exemptions.
For communication providers.
The ones we were talking about.
Yeah, those potential loopholes.
But maybe, just maybe, Bermuda's focus on financial stability creates a different kind of pressure.
On those companies.
Exactly.
Interesting thought.
Like in a place where reputation is everything.
And your reputation is tied to the economy.
All right. Maybe there's a built-in incentive to be more careful with data.
Even if the law isn't breathing down their necks.
Because a data breach could hurt the whole economy.
Makes sense.
So maybe those exemptions aren't as scary.
It's all about context.
Right. We can't just look at these laws in a vacuum.
Nope. Got to see the bigger picture.
The values, the history, the economic realities.
Because what might be a weakness in one place?
Could actually work just fine somewhere else.
Exactly.
So what's the takeaway for our listener in Bermuda?
Well, first off, congrats on making it through this deep dive. It's been a lot of information.
Then now you've got a deeper understanding
Of your rights under this act.
and a framework for thinking about data privacy.
In your own life.
So don't be afraid to ask questions.
Of companies, of organizations.
Demand transparency.
You have a right to know.
And remember, you're not alone in this.
There are people fighting for your privacy.
Advocates, government officials.
Reach out to them.
Get involved.
Make your voice heard.
Great advice. So, to wrap things up, we've taken you deep into the world of data privacy in Bermuda,
We've explored the Personal Information Protection Act.
unpacked its exemptions and safeguards, and even talked about the bigger picture.
The global implications of data privacy.
It's been a fascinating journey,
It really has.
and we hope you've enjoyed it. Check out our show notes for more resources, and let us know what you think on social media.
We love hearing from you.
Until next time, stay curious.
In this podcast, there could be mistakes, so please check the source material. Enjoy exploring and have a great day.